And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. Dara Mason with us, writer, researcher, and award-winning travel and documentary photographer. He hosts the award-nominated podcast called Spirit Box, best known for his work on the Jinn, the Agodi. He lives in East Sussex, United Kingdom, and that's where we're going live right now. Dara, welcome to the program.
Good morning, George. It's an honor to be here.
How do people hear your podcast, by the way, Spirit Box?
Yeah, the podcast has been around for about just over 4 years now, and I look at all the different types of spirit encounters, folklore, and interview magical practitioners about their experiences. So, yes, it's a fun show.
Fantastic. How did you get involved in the unusual like this?
Well, it started it started really from a lot of my photographic work. I used to be a travel and documentary photographer, and I spent a lot of time in India in particular. And I just started bumping up against this stuff when I investigated certain subjects, like the jinn, which are these beings that are said to be made of smokeless fire, most known within kind of the Arabic world and Islamic world. I also did a documentary piece on a Hindu sect known as the Agori, and they practice some extreme magical rituals, and strange things started to happen when I got into this area, and that really piqued my interest, and I wanted to understand my experiences more, and I just started researching in it, and one thing led to another, really.
Did the strange things, Dara, happen to you, or just whenever?
Yes, some strange things did happen to me, particularly when I went to Delhi in 2016 to shoot a story related to the locations within the city of Delhi that are associated with the jinn. There's a famous book by an author called William Dalrymple called City of Jinns, and it's about his time as a young correspondent in Delhi. So I went to Delhi to shoot these locations and kind of build a story about the jinn, looking at it from a slightly more paranormal perspective. And I just had a list of disasters from day one. I had a quite intense nightmare, which I found out was located in one of the locations that I was going to shoot it. So basically, I was sitting down during a Sufi celebration, and lots of fantastic music in a place called Nizamuddin Darg, which is the tomb of a very famous Sufi saint. People go there to be healed by the jinn, healed from the jinn, rather. And during that nightmare, there was a man sitting to my left, and he turned and looked at me, and his face was decomposed, naked, one eye. Yeah, it was quite intense. He was wearing a white hat, and said, "Don't come here." And my camera broke 2 weeks before I was supposed to go. I couldn't get it repaired. No one could figure out what was wrong with it. My father came with me. His tooth broke in Heathrow Airport before we even left on the flight. We had to change hotels like 3 times in 2 days. Like, just everything was difficult. But when I finally got to this location, Nizamuddin, I was directed to an area where there was a small enclosure where people were waiting to be treated by the Sufis to help them with jinn problems. So this would be jinn possession. And there was a man sitting there, and he had a white hat on, and he was staring directly at me. And I believe he was being possessed. He was possessed and possessed by a jinn, and the jinn was staring at me. It's the only time I've ever been afraid to take a photograph in my life.
Have you ever been hurt, Dara, in your work?
I haven't been hurt, but I have had some frightening experiences that challenged my worldview. If you asked me 5 years ago if I believed in spirits and believed in magic, I would have said no. now, I absolutely believe those things are real.
Hence the book Song of the Dark Man, which we're going to get into in a big way.
Yeah.
Here in the United States, we talk a lot about shadow people and the Hat Man. Now, yours is the Dark Man. That's different than these entities, is it not?
I would say the Hat Man and some of the shadow people are lower emanations of the same force.
Which is an evil force.
I think it's more ambiguous than that. I think because the experience is so intense and frightening for people, that they can often believe it to be evil, but it's not necessarily the case. That's not to say that people don't have evil experiences, but it is often an experience that leads to people's worldview being changed, and bringing in creative forces into people's lives. So that's the reason it's called Song of the Dark Man, because sometimes when people have these experiences, these initiatory experiences with the Dark Man, they get a form of creative energy coming through them. They also get a form of magical energy coming through them. So it's almost like an initiation into creativity or initiation into a magical practice.
Dara, who coined the phrase Dark Man?
Oh, goodness. Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many names for this spirit that and this force that I couldn't tell you where that name originally came from, but I heard names like that and others from a lot of the magicians and witches that I interviewed.
Has the name the devil been associated with the Dark Man?
What they would call the folk devil, not the Christian devil.
What's the difference?
Well, the folk devil is more of a trickster type character. So it would be like the devil in folklore that essentially tends to be in morality plays, in these stories that people's character gets questioned. Whereas the Christian devil is more of that kind of opposing figure that is set up to be diametrically opposed to God.
Dara's website is his name. He spells it Darragh, Mason.com, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. Dara, what if you had to explain, and you will, who the Dark Man is, what the Dark Man is, what would you say?
I'd say it's a disruptive force, a destructive force that reminds us that we are part of nature, that we don't own nature, we don't rule over nature, but we are part of it. And that's what I mean about the folk devil being this kind of trickster character. It makes people understand that whatever you think about the world, how it works, who's in control, that all those things can be undermined in an instant.
Is the phrase the Dark Man pretty well known in the United Kingdom?
I wouldn't say so, no. It's more well known in like occult circles.
Why is the Dark Man experience to some so terrifying? What happens?
Well, what I noticed going through the folklore and going through the trials of various trial reports from 17th century, the Scottish witch trials, is there is this figure that often appears that is part animal and part human. It also tends to be jet black, and it tends to interrupt journeys. So we have things like you get the fairy stories about someone's walking along the road at night and then a dark horseman comes up and challenges them to a race, and like the race, the prize of the race is actually their soul, and that dark man will be called like the king of the fairies. So these things tend to interlap quite a bit. People still have these experiences. People still have these interrupted journeys where very strange things happen, but they might be called different things. They might be called like crypto animals or things like that. But it's at the undercurrent, the actual circumstances are the same. Somebody has a journey. They're in between one place and another. It's a liminal thing. They are maybe out somewhere that isn't civilization. It's out somewhere wild, and their journey is interrupted. Something mysterious happens to them, and their world changes. And what I mean by their world changing is their understanding of how the world works, the structure of the universe is utterly changed because they've had this experience that has just turned their world on their head.
Let's break down the title of the book. First of all, Song of the Dark Man. What does that mean?
Well, particularly the reason I chose the word song was a hat tip to the sagas and ancient mythologies and folklores of Ireland, which were performed. These stories were performed. Parts of it were sung. This spirit is associated with inspiration, in particularly things like music and poetry. So that's why I wanted to put that in there, to understand, to help people understand that this is part of this experience and part of the things that this spirit bequeaths to people.
The cover of the book, that picture, that illustration is darn right scary, Dara.
Yes, it is. It is. I had very little to do with that. But, yeah.
Now, the subtitle of the book is one of them, Father of Witches. What does that mean?
So, in the Scottish witch trials, we have a repeated pattern where a dark figure came into someone's life and brought them into magic. So, for example, Margaret Alexander, she was tried in 1647, and she referred to a man in black clothes who made her go forward. She also spoke to this man being the king of the fairies. When pressed, she said his physical nature was cold. Another lady, Margaret Allen, was tried in 1661. And her first servant testified that she saw a black man go into Margaret's room and appear to move around like he had hooves. Thomas Black, tried in 1661, said the devil appeared to him at night in the shape of a man. Agnes Clarkson, tried in 1649, spoke to how her home was filled with a black mist. And then she saw this dark man with whom she has carnal dealings. So the pattern comes up again and again.
The second subtitle is called Lord of the Crossroads. Explain that.
Well, this is a reference to where people and like American conjurmen and people have gone to negotiate with the spirit of the crossroads. And within certain magical schools, the crossroads is believed to be a place of power, that these crossroads have emerged from migration paths of animals, and where they cross over, they're again liminal places. So people will go to the crossroads to initiate contact with the spirit there. So most famously, Robert Johnson, the blues musician, legend has it that the dark man took Robert Johnson's guitar, tuned it at the crossroads, and handed it back to him, along with great talent, success, and money. And we find that pattern goes on and on throughout music. Lots of luminaries talk about Johnson's music: Keith Richards, Robert Plant, Bob Dylan. And quite strikingly, Bob Dylan, in an interview in the early 2000s, he was asked, I think it was 60 Minutes, he was asked why he was still working after many years of success, and he replied, it all goes back to a destiny thing. I made a bargain with it a long time ago, and I'm holding up my end. And when pressed to reveal whom he had made this deal, he gave a wry smile and laughed and said, with the chief commander on this earth and the world we can't see, which was a very striking thing to say and really kind of jumped out at me when I found that out.
What did Robert Johnson have to give up in order to get those benefits?
The legend says that he gave up his soul for this.
Oh. Not worth it, is it?
I wouldn't say so, no.
I mean, I wouldn't trade my soul for whatever Johnson thinks he got out of the deal.
Yep, I would agree with you. Which makes you question what was Dylan talking about.
Good point. Does the Dark Man inject himself in many events?
Yes. What we found here is going through the folklore and mythology is I started to see this figure, which in Irish is called An Fear Durca or An Fear Dove. So those terms in Gaelic translate as the Dark Man or the Black Man. Now, when I did some research within some of the Irish folklore collections, which are available online, I started to see this figure come up again and again. And he was set up as this adversarial figure, this trickster figure that would drive all these stories along. And one of the most famous stories that I found him in was in a collection known as the Fenian Cycle. So the Fenian Cycle is a body of Irish literature originally dating from the 7th century. And essentially, the Fenian Cycle is one where these noble warriors, the Fianna, spend their time hunting, fishing, and engaging with adventures in the spirit world. And to help orientate people, think an Irish Knights of the Round Table. That's kind of what we're looking at here. The earliest compilation of the Fenian stories is found in An Column na Shanara, or the colloquially of Ancients. And this text is made up of 3 manuscripts, 2 from the 15th century and a third dating to the 17th century. But these manuscripts reflect a far older tradition. It goes way back. And Irish is the oldest vernacular language, apart from Latin, in Western Europe. So these stories, the Dark Man turns up only in a very, very small passage. And he sets a whole string of events off that create this great story, which is the story of the birth of Oisin, who is Fionn McCool's son. And essentially, Fionn McCool, who is the Irish Arthur, is out hunting. He finds a strange deer. His dogs won't attack the deer, so he brings the deer back into his fort. That night, a beautiful fairy woman called Siva comes into his quarters and begs his protection from this man who she calls the dark man of the She, or the black magician of the men of God. Now, this is the dark man she's referring to. Now, the dark man of the She is quite particular.
Hold on for a second, Darryl. We're at a break, but we'll pick up that story when we come back. And welcome back. Darryl Mason with us, George Noory with you. Darryl, you're telling us a story about a woman who seems scared from an individual who brought this deer into his house. Tell us what happened.
So this is the story of the birth of Oisin. This is very old Irish mythology, but this the woman's name is Siva, and she was in the form of a deer. When she's brought into the protection of the fort of the hero Fionn McCool, she transforms back into this beautiful fairy woman. And she talks about this dark man of the She, this black magician of the men of God, who had turned her into a deer, and she's looking for protection from him, from our hero. Now, the dark man of the She is a really interesting phrase because
Yes.
So Ban means woman and she means fairy. It literally means fairy woman. So this term is the dark men of the fairies. And the black magician of the men of God. The men of God refers to the Tua de Danann, who are these Irish gods, like Bridget and what have you, all these old ancient Irish pre-Christian gods. So it's positioning him, the dark man, as being something between a fairy and an old god. Now, what happens is Fionn McCool and Siva fall desperately in love, but she is tricked by the dark man and she vanishes, and Fionn never sees her again. But it's quite striking because the story as it plays out sets up this kind of dualistic play, this morality play. So Fionn, the name Fionn means white or fair-haired, and obviously the dark man is his adversary. So it sets up this opposition of light versus darkness. When the dark man appears to Siva, he actually appears as Fionn to trick her. And it's allegorical to darkness containing light, and that these two forces are intertwined, and any separation is an illusion. And then we have human shape-shifting in there, humans being transformed into a deer and back, and that's suggesting that humans are not as separate from the animal world and nature. Now, out of Siva and Fionn's union, the child Uiscin is born. Now, Uiscin literally means little deer. There was a very famous book written by a poet, a Scottish poet, James Macpherson, and the book was called Single, and it was written in 1762, and it's centered on the hero poet Ossian, and it's the same figure as Uiscin. And Napoleon himself had this book. It was one of his favorite books. It was hugely popular. And Uiscin and Ossian are actually half fairy, which is an extraordinary thing. And in one of the later tellings of Uiscin's story, he travels through time because he went to fairyland, where a year in the human world, or a year in fairyland, is 100 years in the human world. And he came back, and when he came back, he is transported into Christian Ireland, and he ends up debating with St. Patrick. And what we have is this extraordinary thing where we have this discourse between two iconic Irish figures, and this story lays out the kind of theological debates, the moralistic debates between St. Patrick and Uiscin. So the age of the heroes and the age of Christianity, as those things change in Ireland. But Uiscin's tale is strange because it muddies the ontological waters, and it provides the dark man with a vehicle to exist in the slipstream of Christianity as it took root in Ireland. And through that story and others, he exists in the imagination as this indeterminate fairy or devil. Now, the primary distinction here is that the folklore in which the dark man lived was in the language of the people. It was in Gaelic. The language of Christianity was Latin, which the population didn't understand. And Irish festivals and celebrations largely contained an ancient pagan component alongside the Christian ones. So the pagan was hidden in the Christian messaging. So it's kind of a dual practice, if that makes sense.
Now, you devote a portion of your book to a chapter called Fire in the Blood. What is that?
So this is a reference to that initiatory experience that I mentioned earlier, that it is essentially how the qualities of inspiration and received mysticism that the dark man can ignite in the hearts of people. And a determining sign of having fire in the blood seems to be a sensitivity and an ability to work with the other world. And that often doesn't mean that people are proficient or understand what's happening to them. And that's why it's universal that a lot of societies have a shamanic tradition or a mystery school where people with those kind of capabilities can train to engage with the spiritual world. And these things can often go down through family lines, like you hear things like the seventh son of a seventh son or a seventh child of a seventh child having those kind of abilities.
What is the trickster portion of the Dark Man?
Well, this is really kind of an extraordinary thing, and this is where we have where he injects himself into culture and stories as well. And there's two main ones that I kind of pull out in the book. The story of the Devil's Footprints. On the 9th of February in 1855, the local people of the ex-estuary in South Devon woke up to find hundreds of miles of cloven hoof prints set in deep snow. And there was never any explanation. These went up over houses, across fields. No one ever knew what happened with this. And the other one was this story in the town of Swansea in Wales, where the town people decided their church should be rebuilt. And legend had it that a local architect applied for the job, but he was beaten by the acclaimed architect Sir Arthur Blomfield. And they were thrilled to have such a kind of prestigious person attached to the project. And but the local architect didn't take this rejection lightly. And he bought the neighbouring buildings and put a wooden carving of a horned devil to face the church. And this local man was accused of prophesied, when your church is destroyed and burnt to the ground, my devil will remain laughing. And that church was destroyed during the Swansea Blitz in 1941 during World War II. So that prophecy came through. So there's little bits like that in folklore. But in terms of the really kind of trickstery stuff, the two stories I pull out are the very famous story of the Pied Piper and the story of Spring-Heeled Jack. So with the
both great stories, by the way.
Yeah, absolutely, and they're absolutely fascinating stories. So people will be very familiar with the story of the Pied Piper. The town of Hamlin is overrun with rats, and the mayor, desperate to deal with it, strikes a deal with this mysterious, handsome man in an extraordinary outfit with a silver flute, turns up. Now, the silver flute is quite interesting because it denotes this kind of rare metal, and it's kind of associated with, particularly the flutes and pipes are associated with fairies a little bit. So there's an element of enchantment there. Now, the mayor obviously reneges on his deal after the piper leads the rats away and gets rid of them, demonstrating this mastery over nature. And the mayor reneges on his deal, and they are punished. The whole town is collectively punished in this staggeringly cruel way. I mean, it's so severe that we're still talking about it 750 years later, where all the children are led away from the town, following the Pied Piper, dancing to his song, utterly enchanted by this music. And it is said that there was one child who was slightly lame and was following, couldn't keep up with the main body of children, and he saw a door in the side of a mountain open, and this beautiful land inside, and the piper vanished into it, and the children followed suit, and that the children were never seen again.
Wow.
So, yeah, it's a very frightening thing.
Would you say that the Dark Man is associated with evil?
I think in some parts, yes, but I think it's more ambiguous than that. It seems to be associated with a lot of very strong fairy lore and old pagan gods. The second story was Spring-Heeled Jack, and for those who aren't familiar, Spring-Heeled Jack was like this devilish anomaly with the outlandish ability to leap great heights. And Spring-Heeled Jack first appeared in the 1800s, predominantly in London. In October 1837, a young woman by the name of Mary Stevens was accosted by Spring-Heeled Jack while walking through London's Clapham Common. And her clothes were ripped, and she was touched by the attacker's claws, which were reported as being cold and clammy. And these attacks repeatedly happened. And they happened at the peak of the British Empire, when the British Empire itself, was that really it was believed to be the height of civility and rationality, and actually those ideas were used as justification for a lot of the imperialism that the British Empire partook in. So while this kind of this belief that rationality and science is at the heart of the empire, the citizens of the empire's capital watched the rooftops in fear of a fire-breathing devil who could jump 12 feet in the air. And as if to underline this point, the last cluster of sightings of Spring Hill Jack that happened in 1877 was at the Aldershot garrison in the southeast of England. And Aldershot was known to be the home of the British Empire. It was 10,000 troops garrisoned there. And this figure would come bounding out of the darkness, strike the sentries, and then bound back out. Absolutely staggered. They couldn't get over it, couldn't deal with it. So this extraordinary thing that would happen to again, show that even despite the might of the British Empire, in the heart of the most powerful military force in the world, this phantom could come out of nowhere and strike at will.
Pretty dramatic, isn't it, Dara?
The Pied Piper is Germanic. The Spring Heel Jack is British.
Do the Irish still make reference to leprechauns?
They do. I mean, it's still kind of a thing. There was alleged to be a shoe of a leprechaun up to the kind of the 1930s. There's still a belief in fairies to a degree. I put it this way: there's kind of a joke that people ask about, do you believe in fairies? And modern Irish people are like, no, don't be ridiculous. But don't say it too loudly because they're listening. So they can hold both ideas in their heads at the time. When there was a road diverted in the 1990s, there was a big kind of a new road being built in County Clare, and it was diverted because it went straight into the path of a fairy tree, and the locals wouldn't cut it down.
Did the ancient Victorians believe that the devil was also the dark man?
I think they would have thought that there was some overlap. They certainly would have considered it a phantom, a devilish phantom of some description.
Are they scared?
I believe the Spring Heel Jack absolutely terrified people, yeah. There was widespread panic in London about it.
When was the last report of Spring Heel Jack?
Well, the most kind of famous one was that one I mentioned about Aldershot Garrison in 1877. But there was a modern sighting this century in London of a tall, dark figure jumping a huge distance across traffic in London, which people said reminded them of the Spring Heel Jack phenomenon. So there seems to be still little bits of it, echoes of it.
There seems to be a lot of geographical places named after the devil, though.
Yes.
Why?
Well, sometimes I think there's two pieces to this. First off, I think it's often done to explain, they use folkloric explanations featuring the devil to explain strange natural phenomena. I think that's one of the reasons. The other reason is these might be very liminal places where the veil is thin between this world and the other world. So, things like Skinwalker Ranch would be one of those places.
And welcome back, George Noory, along with Dara Mason. His book is called Song of the Dark Man. Dara, what do you think causes the Dark Man to pop up, to show up wherever he may be?
That's a fantastic question. I think that historically, what we've been able to ascertain, particularly from the Scottish witch trials, is whenever he appeared, it seemed to be at a time where there was desperate times. So, for example, like one lady, the report she gave was it was just after her husband had died, and she was had a young child. Now, at that time in Scotland, that was almost a death sentence, because she would have had nobody bringing in income and food into the house, be reliant on on charity. So things like that, when there is some sort of like traumatic event, he would often appear around that time. It was also kind of noticeable around these liminal spaces, so these in-between places, like when people were on journeys through remote places, that seemed to have a high occurrence as well.
When the Dark Man appears, do bad things happen to good people?
Sometimes. Yeah, sometimes they do. There seems to be a test of one's mettle when the Dark Man appears. As I said, this is a terrifying experience. Sometimes he will appear as being part human, part animal. And just like in the stories of Oisin and Finn McCool, where the fairy woman was turned into a deer to trick Fionn, the Dark Man has appeared as a deer as well. This is where we have this thematic connection between the folklore and the witch trial documents. But there's no doubt that his appearance is utterly terrifying for people. And this is that test of mettle. In the folkloric stories, he's questioning, what do you really value? Do you value material things, or do you value your loved ones in your life? And this is a strange dichotomy, because you have, often this ostentatious, terrifying figure, yet it's asking questions about what's your morality. Challenging you to have value in some instances in the folklore, non-material things. And this is why I say it's ambiguous, because that doesn't sound like the behavior of what we would say, kind of quote unquote, the devil is. The devil, we know, is the one who's tempting, not challenging you, and in terms of what do you really stand for. So that's what I mean. It's ambiguous, but certainly challenging things do happen. But it's related to what do you stand for? What's your character made of? That test of mettle. Sorry, go ahead.
Can the Dark Man be seen in more than one place at one time?
I would believe so, yes. This is not limited by time and distance.
Let's go to the phones. We're taking phone calls with Dara Mason about the Dark Man. Corny in Louisiana, welcome to the show, Cornelius.
Oh, you get me off at the first banner up. I tell you, George, you're something else. Lionel Fanthorpe would have loved this.
Yep.
Look, Mason, I live in what they call the God, Guns, and Gold area, the Bible, Bullets, and Beans, man. That's what they call me. There's a lot of voodoo, hoodoo, and voodoo down here in New Orleans, Louisiana, but I'm in Alexandria, and I hope one day you'll come to New Orleans. We got all these voodoo priests and priestesses and all like that, and they do a lot of dark magic. Matter of fact, they wanted me to get a curse out on somebody, but I don't want to do that. I believe Christ can curse people, and that curse will never get off. And we need to pray for our police officers. We had a police officer in Lafayette get murdered in an ambush. So if y'all can, Lafayette, Louisiana, police officer, wife, and 5 kids, we need to try to help him out and pray for our troops. That grandmother from Buffalo, New York, she's got a grandson over there where the war's at, so we need to pray. But my question for you, have you ever looked into voodoo or anything like that, and will you come to Louisiana? God bless you, George, and God bless Coast to Coast AM.
Voodoo, Dara.
I've interviewed guests who are initiated voodoo priests. There's it's a very strong and potent practice, and I understand it's alive and well in the area that the caller has just
yes, huge.
mentioned. Yeah.
Did you ever get to the United States, Dara?
Many years ago when I was a student, a long time ago now. In the late 1990s.
What's going on with all these riots in the United Kingdom these days?
Yeah, it's a scary time. It's a scary time. It's a very divided society at the moment.
What are people upset about?
There was a murder of 3 young girls.
The stabbings, right?
Yeah, and there was some protests which then became violent, and now it seems to be kind of erupting around across the country.
This whole planet seems to be upside down. Do you get that feeling?
100%. Yeah.
It's like the dark man's doing whatever he does.
Yeah, there's something happening. Kind of, as you said, everywhere you look, terrible things are unfolding. It seems to be our world as it stood, the world that we were familiar with, is breaking down. And those things which seemed like they were unchanging or unquestionable are all falling. It seems to be just we have the misfortune to live in this particular time.
If any of you have had a episode of a Hat Man, Shadow People, or the Dark Man happen, share that story with us. Give us a call at Coast to Coast AM. How many years has the Dark Man story been around, Dara?
Thousands of years.
That long? My God. Almost since the beginning of time.
Absolutely. Yeah. It goes all the way back to the cave art, on the walls of caves like the Trois cave in France. We have depictions of horned men, or these composite beings, which are known as perianthropic figures. They're part human, part animal. We're talking literally 13,000 years ago.
Can an evil person summon up the Dark Man? Literally call him up?
There are magical rituals where someone could access that, yes.
Is that difficult or easy to do?
I don't think any of these things are easy to do. Like the old English term for a witch would be a cunning man or a cunning woman. And the reason they're called cunning is if they're working with a force like the Dark Man, they need to be intelligent to navigate it, because of, this is a very, very powerful force. And they need to be able to kind of negotiate that. And that takes skill and knowledge and to do so and come out without something awful happening. there's a reason why these things have a bad reputation, because they can be dangerous. Absolutely can be dangerous. But to answer your question directly, yes, an evil person could do that.
Will prayer make it go away?
In some cases, yeah, people can report that. Yes.
Back to the phones. Brad in Sacramento, California, first-time caller. Hey, Brad, go ahead, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Okay,
I used to work in a funeral home, and I seen things there, and I talked to about 5 different individuals there, not at the same time. I asked them, I said, man, I seen something. And they were like, huh? And they all had the same comment. I mean, we all had the same experiences, basically. And it's just beyond that, just things that I had throughout life. And, it's just something you can't explain.
What do you think you saw, Brad?
I don't know.
Did it seem evil?
No.
It did not.
No, it wasn't evil. And trust me, Mr. Noory, when I was in my 20s, when I was 20, I got into satanic religion. But major, major mistake. I've been praying about that ever since.
Who got you out of it?
I got myself out of it.
Good for you.
But that was not the major issue. Who got me into it?
Well, that's an interesting question. Who did? So a friend, family member?
Just a fellow airman.
From the military,
and yeah. And when I talked to other individual down the road, he goes, "You know what, Brad? You were lonely. You were vulnerable. It's you got into it. You did, but the guy that got you into it, he was the perpetrator."
Dara, what about prayer? Does that work against something like this?
There are certain psalms that people are known to invoke if they're threatened by a spirit. In magical circles, things like banishing rituals or license to depart could be used. But I know several people who they deal with things like people having like fairy problems in their house, who would use certain types of prayer or like certain types of charms and tools to basically make the problem go away and navigate those issues. Equally, in Islam, there are certain hadiths and passages in the Quran that are used to deal with jinn problems and evil spirits.
We get text and tweets all the time, Dara. What do we have, Tom, for Dara?
Dana from Indiana, please have the guest talk about his thoughts on paranormal activity and if he thinks it can only be as bad as a person's mind will let it be.
What do you think of that, Dara?
That's a very interesting question. I mean, certainly one's perception of what's happening to him can exponentially make something worse. Certainly, kind of, if you have a very bad reaction to something, it brings out awful levels of terror. I think it's very individual how people will react to certain paranormal situations. There is some theory and thoughts around people's energy being drained by kind of paranormal attacks, that the actual purpose of the attack is to feed off someone's energy. And if you're getting someone's having a very strong emotional reaction, that emotional energy could be a source of could be the target of the being doing the attacking.
What does the dark man want there? The person's soul?
I think in some cases that might be the case. Certainly the folklore suggests that. In certain cases, when going back to Robert Johnson, when we spoke about him earlier. But this is where it kind of brings back to my point about the cunning folk, how they were very smart in how they operated and dealt with this force, where they weren't making deals or bargains to that effect. They were clever negotiators, I'd say, in a way. But I think, I couldn't even think as to what the dark man actually wants. It's an intelligence far beyond human comprehension. But what I would hazard to guess is there's an element of the dark man that is here to remind us that we are not separate from nature, that we are still subject to it. We're still subject to a mysterious world. We're still subject to the paranormal. That us as human beings, we are not masters of this world. It might feel like we are with all our kind of artifice of modernity, of civilization, but we are still part of nature. It is not subject to us. That's one area I think that the dark man reminds us of.
Does the dark man ever show emotion?
Interestingly, in some of the experiences that I recount in my book, because I interview people as well about their experiences with the dark man. There's some really, really staggering experiences. But what I've noticed is the dark man actually has a very good sense of humor, and will make jokes with people, which is quite interesting.
What kind of jokes?
Well, there was a lady who saw the dark man on top of Glastonbury Tor. She went up. That's a place in the southwest of England. It's a very, very sacred place. And she went up the Tor with her friend at like 3 a.m. And when they got up there, to their shock, this 9-foot tall dark figure materialized. And they were absolutely in shock. But it asked them for a cup of tea.
A cup of tea?
Just bizarre. Or a cigarette.
It's got a strange sense of humor. We'll come back and wrap things up with you, Dara, in a moment. And welcome back, Dara Mason with us. Dara, thank you for being part of the program, and good luck with Song of the Dark Man. Where is it available?
It's available on all good bookstores, Amazon, Barnes & Noble. So, it's out there. Went out on the 6th, and it's all go now. So, thank you for having me on.
Okay, my friend. Who are the Watchers? Are they evil? Talking about the Dark Man, what about the Watchers? Why are they here? Here's investigative mythologist William Henry, because he's got some answers.
And as you well know, William Henry is an investigative mythologist, author of a number of books and DVDs. His latest, The Watchers, Lost Secrets of Ascension, Resurrection, and Perfection. William, welcome back. How are you?
I'm wonderful, George. Thank you so much for having me on the show again tonight.
Any traveling?
I've been in Connecticut. I was in L.A. On Monday doing some new interviews for Ancient Aliens. Really excited about that.
Good for you. Should have looked us up while you were here.
Well, it was such a fast track, and so I just there overnight. And on a personal note, I had a sick cat who passed away yesterday, so it was kind of a really emotionally very, very difficult time. He was my beloved buddy, and he's on his journey now.
How old was he?
He was 11.
Now, that's not too old for a cat, is it?
No, it's not. It was sad. I was really hoping he'd be here a few more years, and but it was time for him to go, sadly, and going to miss him dearly.
Well, he's out there somewhere. You know that.
He's here with us now.
Yep, absolutely. Tell me about the Watchers.
The Watchers, incredible story. very controversial, of course. There's a broad range of viewpoints on the Watchers, ranging from they're demons, they're evil, they're controlling us. People want to know why are they here and what are they doing? Why are they interfering with humanity? And people actually blame the Watchers for humanity's ills. And that's one very definite point of view. But then the other point of view is that they were here. They came from the heavenly realm, from the realm called Sion, according to the Bible, the location of God's throne. They're dispatched to earth in order to bring a new teaching to humanity, a teaching about how humans can transform into angels and make the journey from the earthly realm to the heavenly realm of Sion. And it seems that what's happened in the intervening centuries, and by the way, the Watchers were briefly mentioned in the Old Testament in the book of Genesis, and then it's the Essenes, about 150 years before Jesus. All of a sudden, there's this rise of astounding what's known as apocalyptic material developed by the Essenes. Apocalyptic simply means that a human man is in contact with an otherworldly being, a supernatural being, an angelic being, maybe even an extraterrestrial in some people's view, who delivers knowledge about another supernatural world. And this then became an explosion of knowledge about the Watchers and the ability of humans to cross over what the Church considers a forbidden boundary between flesh and light, between spirit and flesh.
Now, the Essenes, did they not write the Dead Sea Scrolls as well?
That's exactly right. The Essenes, there's no question that after the destruction of the Temple of Solomon in AD 70, when the Essenes were attacked, the Roman army came into Jerusalem, into Galilee. The Essenes bundled up their sacred texts, which there were many, hid them in caves, and they were lost until 1947 when they were rediscovered. And this is when modern consciousness really begins to understand the full story of the Watchers.
The Watchers, are they angelic? What realm are they from?
Two schools of thought. There's some that believe that they're simply and only human beings, ancient pagan royalty who existed maybe going back to the time even before the flood, and that they were able to survive the flood and then continued with new bloodlines after the time of the flood. The second viewpoint is that they are, and this comes from the Bible as well as the Dead Sea Scrolls, that they are celestial beings, light beings, ephemeral beings who had the ability to phase into physical manifestation. They could take flesh and blood bodies and phase back and forth, by the way, between flesh and blood and their light being status, and then infiltrated human affairs.
That sounds angelic to me, William.
They are, and this is where it gets kind of disturbing, because as you begin to research the Watchers, you're presented with a crossroads. You're either going to take the tack that they're purely evil and they're demonic, as many people do, and if you take that path, it's going to lead you down to the path where you're following their offspring, who are called the Nephilim, as these giant beings with elongated skulls, and this whole axis of research, which is very interesting. But if you're following that path, chances are you are not probing deeply behind the text and into the text left by the Essenes, and you're realizing that the Essenes themselves were utilizing ancient texts and teachings that they had developed and synthesized from ancient Babylon, Egypt, Iran, Iraq, the teachings of Pythagoras, that were centered on how do we contact the Watchers, one, and two, how do we transform ourselves into angels? And in fact, this is what the Dead Sea Scrolls are all about, is this group of Essenes, Jewish mystics, 150 years before the time of Jesus, who were utilizing these teachings to congregate with the angels, the holy ones, the angels of the Lord, the Watchers, and were transforming their bodies into light. In other words, into angels.
The Nephilim, which, of course, in the book of Genesis, to me, they're fallen angels. I'm not sure. What do you think?
I don't think so, because when you look at the etymology of the meaning of the word Nephilim, it's far, far from established fact. The term fallen angel means that they are evil beings, or that they are beings who are somehow demonic. They're fallen because they came out of the higher vibrational, if you will, heavenly realms and took human bodies. That is their great sin. They crossed what the church establishment views as a forbidden boundary. You're not allowed to cross over from flesh into spirit without God's permission. And this is the whole crux of the question. Did the Watchers, when they descended from the heavenly realms and took on physicality, did against the will of God? And that's going to determine your whole viewpoint about the Watchers. And what happened is that early church fathers, based on some of the work of the Essenes and others, simply decided that they were demonic beings, that they were powers that were beyond human control, and certain humans began teaching that we need to avoid the Watchers at all costs. Do not seek to transform yourself into an angel without God's permission, because in order to actually, what the church terms as ascend or experience the rapture, you have to be invited by God. And that's the great crossing line that the Watchers transcended or crossed over and came to teach humans how to do, how to turn into angels.
William, in your book, The Watchers, you do talk about a luminous cloud where gods rode on them. To me, it sounds like Ezekiel's wheel. It sounds kind of UFO-ish, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, in the New Testament, the Greek word for clouds is nephil, which is the word where we get the word Nephilim from. And so these are cloud riders. And when you, as I did in my book, in the Watchers book, I collected various examples of Judeo-Christian art that shows the Watchers, including Jesus, riding upon cloud vehicles, luminous clouds. They're literally levitating on these clouds. And what we learn is that this cloud is actually a symbol for their ascension body, their light body. It's not a hardware UFO like a flying Toyota. It's actually an organic light vehicle that is produced by the human body, and it enables them to travel interdimensionally and throughout the cosmos.
Talking with William Henry, his latest work, The Watchers, and of course we're going to get into many things that he as an investigative mythologist goes after. These gods that visited us, spiritual or physical?
Spiritual first, who had the ability to phase into physicality. And their bodies are described actually as fluid. They can virtually instantly, according to these stories, transform from their aqueous, adaptable kind of fluid shape into physicality. They can even turn invisible. And this is what we discover in some of the Gnostic texts as well as in the Dead Sea Scrolls, where they're describing, looking at these luminous beings who are radiating rainbow light, who their bodies are described as full of eyes, they're covered with feathers, and they have serpentine-type faces. And you add all this description together, it precisely matches what the Tibetans describe as the rainbow body of light. In the Tibetan Great Perfection tradition, they believe that humans can morph into a light body that they describe. That what they tell us is that our body, the frequency of our body, can be accelerated until it dissolves into 5-colored rainbow light, leaving behind only hair, toe, and fingernails that have no nerves to be transmuted. The Watchers could do this, and I believe that the Tibetan Great Perfection tradition originates with the Watchers. And so these Watchers could step down their frequency in a way, enter into the earth plane, tune or tone down their frequency, manifest in physical form, and then phase back into their non-physical light being form.
Wow. What did they want, William? Was there an agenda?
In my view, when you follow the ascension path of the Watchers, that they were here, they came here on a rescue mission. They are the Anunnaki, by the way. They were not here for gold. That is Zecharia Sitchin's personal take on the ancient
right. That was his
text. The
theory.
texts never say the Anunnaki came here for gold. That was Sitchin's surmise, his conclusion. They came here, according to these texts, in order to reconnect Earth to a cosmic conduit that links earth with the heavenly realm, specifically with the throne that they refer to as Sion, a place of peace. That is their mission. And along the way, they brought with them their ascension teachings. The Dead Sea Scrolls are very clear that some of the Watchers brought various crafts and technologies with them. They clearly taught humankind how to use various tools and other implements. But along the way, they also, and this is a big beef that the church has with the Watchers, they taught the secrets of heaven. And the secrets of heaven are how humans can transform into angels, ride the cosmic conduit, and dwell at God's throne. And that's the really big question right there, George. Why would the church have a problem with this? Why does the establishment church have a problem with a group of beings coming to earth and teaching humans to become angels?
You would think they would welcome it.
You would think they would welcome it. The problem is that you cut out the church in this scenario. You have no need for the popes and the priests and the whole church establishment because, in fact, the church doesn't teach humans.
Right. You can do it on your own, right?
You can do it on your own. And that is the big question. Can humans take it upon themselves to perfect themselves, is the term, to become more whole, to become more holy, to become more complete? If you answer no, then chase them as demons, chase them as giants. If you answer yes, and you're getting into the innermost esoteric secrets, the most closely guarded secrets of all humankind, the secrets that they, whatever government or New World Order type authority you subscribe to, these are the secrets they do not want you to know about. These are the secrets of the Illuminati, ultimately.
Well, you mentioned something, too. Is there any evil at all connected with the Watchers?
Well, there is in perception. I mean, the Essenes were absolutely clear in their writings that there are two currents or forces of the Watchers. One was represented by the Archangel Michael, who's also sometimes referred to as Melchizedek, who established a priesthood of which Jesus was a member. The other current or force is led by Belial, who is referred to later as the Antichrist. And they were of the belief that these two forces or currents are active in our consciousness at all times. This is kind of the Christian concept of the devil on one shoulder and the angel on the other. And it was all about harmonizing these forces and recognizing that through the power of our own consciousness and our own thoughts, we can actually become angels.
It's an amazing possibility. How did you uncover this?
I've actually been on the trail of the Watchers for some time. I mean, I've been, of course, on the Anunnaki trail for 15 years or so, and then I started researching the Seraphim several years ago. These are the highest order of angels. Mm-hmm. They watch or guard God's throne. And in fact, during the Renaissance, a belief was developed that the Seraphim were actually humans who had transformed themselves into angels or perfected themselves. The book of Hebrews describes the heavenly throne of God, referred to as Sion, and they tell us that it's inhabited. It's inhabited by joyful angels and the angels of the Lord, the Watchers, and just humans made perfect. And I'm reading this, I'm going, well, who are these people? What did they know? How did they perfect themselves? How did they get to turn into angels and go and dwell in God's throne? And can I? How can I? And that's what started me on this real path of trying to uncover the secrets of the Watchers.
Fascinating. For Dan Galante, Tom Danheiser, Lisa Lyon, Lex Lonehood, Sean Ladisseur, Stephanie Smith, Chris Burrows, Tim Manal, George Knapp, and Richard Serrett. From the City of Angels near the Pacific Ocean, good morning, good evening, wherever you may be across the nation, around the world. I'm George Noory. This is Coast to Coast AM. Later tonight, we're going to take a walk on the paranormal side. Here's what's happening. Well, about an hour ago, as we were preparing for this program tonight, we got hit with a 5.3 magnitude earthquake. The building shook. Since then, there have been about 28 small aftershocks. Wow. California. Here's what's happening. Democratic Governor Tim Walz is not a household name outside his home state of Minnesota. So in the hours after Vice President Kamala Harris named the former longtime congressman and two-term governor as her running mate on the Democratic Party's 2024 ticket. The Harris campaign instantly began working to showcase Walz. His biography was blasted out on social media platforms, including Instagram and Twitter X, formerly known as Twitter, of course, and the Harris campaign spotlighted the governor in a new video. Here's Dr. John Curtis, onlinecolumnist.com. John, what do you think of this selection?
Well, I mean, I'm glad they're happy with it. I'm pretty happy with it, actually, because I think it's a pretty dismal selection on her part. First of all, George, why didn't she pick Josh Shapiro? Infinitely better campaigner, rising star in the Democrat Party. I mean, somebody intelligent, somebody who is not pandering to certain groups, actually somebody that you can be proud of. No, she didn't pick Shapiro because she's afraid of riots at the DNC convention coming up in Chicago. Why would they riot? Because she was going to pick a Jewish vice presidential candidate. As you know, that Al Gore picked one 24 years ago with Joe Lieberman. And, well, that didn't go the way they wanted it to. The fact that she would pander and capitulate, I mean, this is total capitulation to Rashid Tlaib and Ilhan Omar and AOC and all the pro-Palestinian progressives on the left. Okay, so that's one issue. The next issue with Tim Walz is this is a guy with a mediocre history in terms of his educational background, went to a very small private college. Well, a lot of people do. But he was a school teacher and a high school football coach. And you're telling me that he's ready with Kamala Harris, George, to step up and run the mighty U.S. economy and to be able to get the country out of these wars in the Mideast and, of course, in Ukraine, the takeover by Iran, basically, of the Red Sea shipping channels. We're talking about some big issues in this presidential race. And you've got Kamala, who knows little or nothing about foreign policy or the economy, and this Walz, who is a so-called expert in agriculture. Well, how's that going to work out for the country? So when they get over the euphoria that exists that they got rid of Biden, which was probably a good thing because we all know that he's not fit for 4 more years, but now they've got somebody who has pretty mediocre credentials, and is really not in a position, to lead this country out of the mess that it's in. And Wall Street is starting to deteriorate. We've seen it.
That November Tuesday on election night is your night. You'll be with us, John.
I will.
All right, my friend. Dr. John Curtis, onlinecolumnist.com. Drinking water is crucial for preventing dehydration and keeping the body functioning, particularly in the heat of summer. But consuming now too much over a short period can lead to health problems, including disorientation, nausea, vomiting, and in severe cases, seizures or death. Overhydration, they call it, could be a growing issue, according to some researchers. As more people train for endurance competitions like marathons, heat waves become more frequent and reusable water bottles become a staple of everyday life. Simply be careful. Stocks rallied Tuesday, bouncing from widespread losses on Wall Street the prior day. The Dow rose 294 points. All 11 sectors of the benchmark index rose Tuesday, led by real estate, financials, and communication services. Here's Charles Koppes, author of America's Financial Reckoning Day. Are we headed for a recession, Charles? What's your gut tell you?
Well, it seems kind of likely to me, but we've been had quite a roller coaster here in the markets. With Monday was quite a sell-off. We even saw Bitcoin go down, and all of this was then preceded by declines on Thursday and Friday, and now we have what they call the Tuesday turnaround and so on. But there's several factors going on right now in the world, and this includes the Japanese carry trade, and this is a really crowded trade with traders where they buy a cheap currency and they invest it in higher yields globally. And Japan's had negative rates for years, and in March they went to zero. In July, their currency was about a 38-year low against the U.S. dollar and so on. And then last week they raised their rates suddenly to 25 basis points, and this spooked the global markets. And so we see this really shaking the markets up a bit. And the Nike had the sharpest drop since Black Monday of 1987. But this carry trade was going into the tech stocks, which was, really took a hit. This was preceded also by Buffett selling half of his Apple stock. And then the Monday volume was so heavy that several brokerage firms couldn't even get access online. I couldn't even get into my Schwab account. And, that doesn't bode very well for the future. But, most people have the recency bias. The stocks will always keep going up and so on. And this is the way it's been. The Dow was down about 3%. In 1987, stocks fell 22%. That would be a big day. That'd be 8,000 points. But, we've had weak jobs report last week. Unemployment's the highest in 3 years. The purchasing manager index has fallen below the 50 mark. That usually indicates a recession as well. Analysts say there's maybe a 25% chance of a recession, but, a recession is 2 negative growth quarters. But when you have real inflation running higher than the nominal inflation, what they say it is, that's negative growth. We're just trying to get by. We've really had a weak economy, I think, since 2008, with people just living paycheck to paycheck. I even hear that shoplifting is up something like 30% in the last year. And, so people are suffering out there. And then, of course, we have the threat of war in the Middle East. And what would that do to oil prices? And, Iran is likely to strike Israel here at some point. Some think that might be on next Monday, which would be very symbolic because that's Tisha B'Av. That's when both Jewish temples were destroyed, 600 years apart. But very symbolic that they would do that. So that's something to look out for. And finally, we have the Fed expecting to cut rates in September if we're going to have recession, predictions. After the highest rates in 23 years, and this is after almost 2 decades of near zero rates. And it just shows you, George, that central planning really doesn't work. And this is why I always say the interest rate should be set by the market, the free market, and not by these central banks. This is what happens when you mess around with these interest rates. You get carry trades and all kinds of stuff. So very connected world we live in, and right now we do have a strong dollar. I think a weak dollar is really going to help continue to drive gold and silver prices, and I'm going to have more to say about that in my next newsletter. If people want to get that, they can go to my website at idpconsultinggroup.com. Just put in their name and email to get that.
Great, thanks. We'll talk to you next week, Charles. In a moment, best-selling author James Rollins joins us. His latest work, Archangel. He's next on Coast to Coast AM. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. James Rollins back with us. Decided to become a writer as a boy, immersed in the scientific adventures of Doc Savage, the wonders of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells, and pulp classics such as The Shadow, The Spider, and The Avenger. He honed his storytelling skills early, spinning elaborate tales that were often at the heart of pranks played on his brothers and sisters. But Jim first pursued a career in veterinary medicine, graduating from the University of Missouri, which is a great vet school, establishing a successful veterinary clinic. His hands-on knowledge of and interest in medicine and science helped shape the research and scientific speculation that set James Rollins' books apart. James, welcome back, my friend. How have you been?
I'm doing fantastic. Thanks, George. It's always a pleasure being on your show. Thanks for having me back.
Though your books are incredible novels, there's a lot of truth behind all of them, isn't there?
I love sort of shedding, pulling back the curtains and showing the wonders and mysteries of this world that people aren't often aware of. I'm actually shocked sort of at the end of all my books, I have a what's true and what's not section where I sort of tell people, how much of the story is based on fact and how much is fiction. And many people are surprised at, how fact-based my stories are, even though they sound pretty fantastical.
And they are indeed. And you've been on before. We've talked about an installment series called the Sigma Force. Tell everybody what that is.
Yeah, Sigma Force, it's a group of special forces soldiers that were drummed out of the service for various reasons. But because of special skills, aptitudes, abilities, they're secretly recruited by DARPA, the Defense Department's Research and Development Agency, and they're retrained in various scientific disciplines to act as basically field agents for DARPA. They're sent out into the world to protect against global threats. And the short term is they're basically scientists with guns.
Dangerous guns.
And I'm sort of excited that if I can just share some off-the-topic thing, if I can do a little bit of bragging, is that Amazon picked up the Sigma Force series potentially for a streaming series.
They did a great job picking that up, didn't they?
Yeah, I'm excited. Leonardo DiCaprio's production company, Appian Way, and Oakhurst Entertainment are going to try to bring them onto the small screen.
All right, well, let's talk about Archangel. How'd you get the title?
Well, Archangel is actually the name of a city in the northern coast of Russia, and Archangel is why they got the name is that they consider that city to be protected by the Archangel Michael, and that plays a role in the story in regards to the mythology of the region, tied to the Russian Orthodox Church, tied to the Vatican, and to this complex web of conspiracy that goes back centuries.
The good part about your books, James, is you don't have to read them all in order to get the chronology out of it.
No, at this point, I think I'm probably the only one that's read my series in order. Most people will wander into an airport bookstore. They'll see it on the shelf. They'll pick it up. They'll read it. Because basically, I designed it that way. I didn't want people to feel like if they jumped in the middle of the series, they'd be lost. If there's any background in this a part of the story, I'm going to tell you in the current book so you don't feel lost. So pretty much you can jump in anywhere.
Now, this book, it deals with the Arctic in a frozen island. Tell me how you came up with this concept.
Well, I'm always looking for mythology. It's fascinated me. When I went to college, I took classes in Greek mythology. But what I love playing with in my books is looking for that seed of truth that was the basis for this mythology. And for the longest period of time, everybody believed that there was a lost continent, a continent buried in the ice near the North Pole. And this goes all the way back down to those Greeks. They believed that there was a continent far to the north. They called it basically Hyperborea, which means basically Boreas is the god of the north wind, and Hyperborea means beyond the north wind. Now, according to the Greeks, this land was deeply forested. It was, rich in wildlife. It's a place of gentle breezes. It was also inhabited by the oldest of human races, a nearly immortal people who could live for centuries. Now, this myth sounds, pretty outlandish, but it persisted all the way into modern times. Even the famous North Pole explorer Robert Peary swore he saw a landmass up near the North Pole. Inuit tribes and other tribes around that coast also swear that they've seen land up there. So I'm, me being one that wants to sort of explore how could that possibly be? So I talked to different historians and to scientists to try to figure out, could there actually have been a continent in the past? And if so, could there be remnants of that continent still existing? And that became sort of the jumping off point for telling the story.
And you're not talking about Atlantis, are you?
Not at all. Atlantis, I've done Atlantis in another book, and I have my own theory about where Atlantis is, in that I explore in that book. But in this one, I'm looking at basically this lost northern continent, this Hyperborea. And as I mentioned before, there was always some hint of truth in mythology. And in one point, one of my characters in the book says, myths can move mountains, that myths really can influence the world. And that's definitely true in this case, in that this belief in Hyperborea is actually a driving force for Russian philosophy. It's behind the driving force of Russians' expansionist viewpoint of the world, that they're supposed to be the new Rome. They invaded Crimea and Ukraine based upon that philosophy. And it's all based upon a Russian philosopher called Alexander Dugin. Back in 1992, he wrote the Hyperborean theory, and he firmly believes that this lost land north of Siberia is where the Russian people originated. They believe they are the modern descendants of these Hyperboreans, these nearly immortal people. And this ultra-nationalist viewpoint led the man's work to be required reading in the Russian military, continued to be taught in their political science academies. And this Alexander Dugin is so influential that some people call him Putin's brain or Putin's Rasputin. There was even an attempt to kill him because he was so important to the Russians. They ended up actually killing his daughter by mistake. And his philosophy basically is that because Russia descends from these Hyperboreans, all of the Arctic belongs to Russia, and that they are a superior race. And it's almost a nearly theological view of Russia's destiny, and that's what was used to justify the invasion of Crimea and Ukraine. And to this point, Dugin still has the ear of Putin, and is still a very powerful influence and philosopher.
Do you think there could be a lost continent out there that has not sunk, that is just out there?
Well, looking at some of my research into the geography and looking at what's out there, there's still, even though most people think, oh, the whole world's the map, it's been, we've got these circulating satellites that just map everything out. But there are still many areas up in the north that are still, specifically the East Siberian Sea, that's still fairly unexplored. The seas in the East Siberian Sea are very violent, they're very volatile, and they're basically avoided by most ships out there. Even icebreakers don't want to go into that area; it's so dangerous. So there's still areas out there that still haven't been explored.
Now, with this era of space mapping, how could they miss that?
Well, basically, you have the sheet of ice covering the Arctic, so that can hide many things that are buried under the ice. Because back in the past, the ice sheet was much smaller, and there could have been land masses in that area. And the bottom of the Arctic Ocean seabed has a fairly mountainous area, to the point where it's vast resources of minerals and oil and gas. And so they've been doing a lot of exploring under there. Specifically, the Russians actually sent a submersible, and they went down under the ice cap and planted Russian flags, basically as the early beginning of saying, this is our territory. We came from this land. This is still our land. Basically, their goal was basically to try to obtain the natural resources buried underneath that ice cap.
Is that why they're up there?
For two reasons. With the thawing of the ice cap, there's a new sea lane that's opening up that basically every sort of the Northwest Passage that goes across the top of North America. Well, there's also a Northeast Passage that goes over the top of Europe. And people have been trying to find that Northeast Passage for centuries. Even going back to the 18th century, Catherine the Great sent these ships out looking to try to find this Northeast Passage. But now that the ice is melting, that passage is becoming easier and easier to sort of map out. And because of that, the Russians are mobilizing great forces along the northern coast. They've reopened old Soviet bases up there. They're pouring in resources. They're bringing in ice. They have basically about 20 times the number of icebreakers that we do, just because they're trying to keep that area under their control. It's becoming a bit of a powder keg, AC powder keg up there.
What do you think is really there, James?
Well, I believe there's vast resources, but in this book, I have my own theory about what could be hidden under there. There was a map maker back, Gerard Mercator, who did a map of that area and drew basically this strange continent up there that he, was basically whipped by whirlpools, had magnetic mountains. But in his map, if you look very closely, he basically lays out in there where he thinks Hyperborea is. And if you look at that map, and in my book I have where I overlay the current map with his map, and there are some correlations that possibly point to where that land might be.
We won't give away the ending to the book by any means, James, but tell me, how close does it echo reality?
Well, at this point, I hope my books inspire people to explore further. I don't have an icebreaker to go out there and look myself, obviously, but I think at this point, because we're seeing this mythology control political directions, that Russia's been very secretive about this buildup on the north coast. I mean, the northern borders, and they're deceptive. Everybody's pointing to looking at Ukraine, and they're pouring a lot of resources in Ukraine, but Russia has not slowed the development of the north.
Hold on for a second, James. We're at a break. We'll come back and pick it up right there. And welcome back to Coast. George Noory with you. James Rollins with us. His website is his name, linked up at coasttocoastam.com. We're talking about his latest book, Archangel. How many books do you have out there now, James?
I'm working on my 44th book, but Archangel is actually my 18th book in the series.
How did you become so prolific?
I think it goes back to, I was a veterinarian, and I was very sort of scientific-oriented, scientific method. When I started to write, it was very regimented. I told myself I had to write 3 pages a day, every day. Then I started sort of qualifying that a little bit. Well, maybe not 3 pages, but if I do 3 double-spaced pages, maybe not every day, I'll do 5 out of 7 days of the week. And once I found that accommodation in my life and how I can fit writing into my veterinary schedule at work, I found that these pages accumulated fairly quickly.
You went through a great veterinary college at the University of Missouri, by the way.
University of Missouri's got a wonderful veterinary college.
One of the best. One of the best. Now, the Russians are in Arctic now. They're actually really there, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, everything north of the Arctic Circle has been sort of a no man's land for most of history, basically. There's 8 nations that border that region, but no country actually has a territorial claim to the vast majority of the Arctic. But that's about to be challenged. With the ice cap melting, access to the seabed has become far easier and more tantalizing. There's offering access to gas, oil, mineral exploration. Supposedly to protect their interests, Russia has, like I mentioned, reopened the Soviet-era military installations, established a slew of new seaports along that northern coast, and they're already seeing conflicts arise at this point. Back in 2007, I mentioned that Russia sent 2 submersibles beneath the ice cap to plant these titanium flags under the North Pole, basically symbolically staking its claim. And back in 2022, the country attempted to extend its territorial reach by 700 square kilometers, brushing up against Canada and Greenland. And this is not an idle thumbing of the nose of the Western world. Like I mentioned before, the far north has been culturally and historically significant to the Russian people, but it's also vital from a military and security standpoint. And so the Russia has begun defending its space vigorously. It's conducted a series of unannounced military exercise across its northern borders involving thousands of troops and scores of ships and submarines, including a significant part of its nuclear arsenal. In addition, the Russian fleet has over 40 icebreakers. We here in the U.S. only have 2. This disparity in polar strength has sharpened tensions and increased military activity across the Arctic Circle. And it just takes a small accident, a misunderstanding, an error in judgment to destabilize that entire region.
That's a good point. Is there a strategic reason to hold on to that, James?
For 2 reasons. Number one, China is very heavily invested in what's going on with Russia because they also want to have an easy access going from the Pacific to the Atlantic. They want a path across northern Russia. So they're funding a lot of this exploration. They're funding a lot of the buildup that's occurring along the northern coast. So we're not just seeing Russia involved in this. It's also the Chinese that are becoming involved. So there's tension just keeps growing hotter and hotter up there because of the amount of resources that are available, because of the fact that they can open up a new pathway from the Pacific to the Atlantic that will save China immense amount of money in regards to shipping their products to the U.S. and across from their side of the world to our side of the world.
So there is a benefit in controlling that region.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to be probably that. I have no doubt that is going to be where the next world war is going to start, is in the Arctic.
Interesting. Now, what is the Lost Golden Library of the Tsars?
Well, thank you for asking. Again, I'm always looking for those little pieces of history that end in a question mark. And this Golden Library of the Tsars ends in a big question mark. We have to go back to the 16th century, to Ivan the Great.
True story.
It's true story, yep. Ivan the Great acquired a vast library as a dowry from his new wife, who was a Byzantine princess. It was said to be a collection that rivaled the world's greatest libraries out there. It contained books and texts thought to be lost forever, tracing all the way back even to the lost library of Alexandria. But after the emperor's death, his grandson, Ivan the Terrible, took possession of it. He grew convinced that it held the secret to Russia's future. And this is true. He believed it contained secrets to black arts, and he hired scholars to begin translating these books. And many of them actually fled in fear that black magic was real and that Ivan the Terrible was going to use it for dire purposes. Later, because of that, he became so paranoid that he hid his library. He hid it so well that after his death, no one could find it. Everybody's been searching it for years. Back in 1724, there's a Russian officer who just reported discovering a room full of trunks in a secret passageway beneath the Kremlin. Now, Moscow, underneath Moscow, is almost a whole city in itself. There's a whole warren of a labyrinth of tunnels that connect various parts of the city. And they believe somewhere under there might be where that library was hidden. Now, since then, hundreds of men, women, historians, explorers, adventurers, thieves, they've been searching for that golden library. And there persist stories that the library contains those mystical texts that would grant Russia great power. Now, no matter the truth of the legend, it's well known that Ivan the Terrible believed the future of Russia was tied to that library. And some say the location of Hyperborea itself could be found in that library.
If they find it, what does that mean?
If they could find that library, besides being just a vast resources, a vast font of knowledge that could be lost to the world, some of the documents that are considered to be lost in there are priceless and treasured, and they also seem to be tied to some mysterious artifacts that disappeared. And this ties, again, a little bit into the Russian Orthodox Church. Most people know that Russia's second largest budget expenditure after the military is devoted to restoring the Russian Orthodox Church. It's seen as a means to a spiritual renewal for the country. It's a way of instilling national pride. But there remain darker shades to this funding. One's tied to the Tikhvin icon. It's one of Russia's most venerated relics. It's a holy icon. It's a picture of Mary with the Christ child that was supposedly painted by the Apostle Luke. And many miracles and healings have been attributed to it. But the history of the icon is a bit clouded. It started in Jerusalem. In the 5th century, it moved to Constantinople, and then it vanished for a period of time until it miraculously appeared to fishermen, a group of fishermen near the Tikhvin River in northern Russia. That's how it became called the Tikhvin icon, because it was found in the Tikhvin River. A church was built on the site to enshrine the icon. Centuries later, Ivan the Terrible, who we were just talking about, fortified a monastery on that site called the Trinity Lavra. And the story of the icon's history is held as holy proof that Russia is destined to be the third Rome, the future spiritual center of the world, with the Trinity Lavra, that fortified monastery that Ivan the Terrible built, as being the site of the future Vatican City. And is one of the main reasons that a vocal number of the Russian Orthodox Church, including its patriarch, sanctions Russia's military conquest of other countries, because they believe that the icon is proof that Russia is supposed to be the third Rome. It's supposed to be the future ruler of the world. Now, there are many. The history of the Tikhvin icon is a bit clouded. Some people that believe that the actual icon might actually be the original. There's some copies that are out there floating around. But I believe the original one might be in that lost library. So again, finding that would be significant to the Russian people, be significant to history. So people are still searching for that.
Is there any religion in Russia right now, James, at all?
Oh yeah, the Russian Orthodox Church has become a fairly predominant force. They're back when they were communists, they outlawed religion, but now that Putin has been putting a lot of money into sort of reestablishing the Russian Orthodox Church.
Why would he do that?
Again, it's a matter of as Dave would say, it's a spiritual renewal for the country. It's about national pride, but also it's a means of power. The Russian Orthodox Church, they advocate that Russia's destiny is going to be the third Rome, so it gives them the justification for their expansion of an ultranationalist theory about going ahead and expanding their borders.
During the Cold War in the 60s, there was a Polish-American priest named Walter Ciszek.
Exactly. I mean, there's a lot of friction between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Vatican. They've been butting heads for centuries. The Vatican actually does have its own, and not people are aware of this, and I've exposed this before in previous books, and it's explored further in Archangel, is that the Vatican actually has its own intelligence agency. It has its own spy network. And for decades, if not centuries, it has dispatched operatives to infiltrate hate groups, secret societies, hostile countries, wherever the concerns of the Vatican might be threatened. And as you mentioned, during the Cold War, there was a Polish-American priest, Walter Ciszek, who played sort of a cat-and-mouse game with the KGB for years, basically, almost a decade, before being captured, and he spent 2 decades in a Soviet prison. And this Vatican intelligence agency is still at work today.
Is there some kind of anti-cancer development going on out there, too?
Yeah, I'm always... We've talked a little about the history of the book, but a good portion of my books deal with science. I'm trying to shine lights on science that maybe sounds esoteric or sounds fantastical, but is basically real. In this book, I explore the unusual biology of bowhead whales. And I consider this book basically as further proof that we need to save the whales. And bowhead whales are a very unique breed of whale. They clock in at about 80,000 kilos, and they can live for 2 centuries. And according to a recent article in New Scientist, this longevity in the whales is due to a unique set of genes that suppresses cancer development. And this miracle is accomplished by just a small set of genes that produces a protein that repairs damaged DNA. So when you get cancer, your DNA is damaged, and this protein that this set of genes produces can repair DNA. It's never been seen before. And that scientists at the University of, I believe it's Rochester, are researching how to actually engineer the same genetic advantage to humans. Right now they're working with mice, and they're having wonderful results with preventing cancer in mice and extending lives by incorporating the set of genes that they found in the bowhead whales.
What a huge breakthrough that would be, James. Huge.
Yeah, I'm excited. I mean, at this point, I want that set of genes.
Now, how did you come across magnetism playing a role in medicine?
Well, I've always been fascinated with that. My dad had really bad arthritis, and he swore by that magnetism seemed to help him a lot. So I've always been fascinated by that. And we know our bodies are electric. You know, each of our cells is a little powerhouse. The main engines are called mitochondria. And as we age, those little engines become less efficient. They cause our bodies to decline. But the use of ultrasound, bioelectricity, even magnetism has shown to have an amazing ability to repower those engines. It basically can reactivate those mitochondria to help with healing, to strengthen the immune system, to slow aging. And again, Sigma Force is a part of the Defense Department's Research and Development Agency and the U.S. Department of Defense. They've started doing clinical trials to showcase how bioelectricity can have the healing time of severe injuries and possibly even regrow nerves. To me, it's sort of the cutting-edge revelations that I love sort of sharing with my readers, and I think this is going to be a huge play in modern medical healing is going to be the use of magnetism.
You have a great affinity for military war dogs, don't you?
I do. I actually, again, in this book, there's a former Army Ranger who's a military war dog handler, and Kane, his military war dog. And, I first encountered this pairing of soldier and war dog while I did a USO tour to Iraq and Kuwait back in the winter of 2010, just as the Gulf War was ending. It was a group of authors. We were sort of a test balloon to see how the forces out there might, would they want to out there talking about their books and about the process. And we had great feedback. But me being a veterinarian, I saw these guys and gals working with their dogs. I was curious, what was this relationship like? Did they just consider their dogs basically like a sidearm, just a weapon? But I found they had this very deep connection to each other. I kept hearing the same phrase over and over again from these handlers. This phrase is, it runs down the lead, which means over time, the dog and handler begin to know each other so well that verbal commands are no longer necessary, hand signals are no longer necessary. Both seem to know what the other needs. Their emotions run up and down that leash, connected one to the other. After that, I went to talk to one of my former veterinary students at the University of Missouri, Columbia, with an Army veterinarian. I actually ran into him in Iraq and got to talk to him about the dogs. I talked to the other members of the U.S. Veterinary Corps. I visited Lackland Air Force Base where they were trained. I interviewed handlers. I met their dogs. And I just found that this sort of single fighting unit between 4 legs and 2 legs was just fascinating to me. And so I wanted to try to highlight them and feature them. So Tucker and Kane appear in this story along with a new war dog named Marco, which I'm sort of honored to be able to use Marco's name. Marco was basically, his name was given to me by a real handler from the 3rd Special Forces Group, whose dog was named Marco. It's this 4-legged soldier located some 30 IEDs, saved countless lives. So to be able to actually sort of honor a Marco's sacrifice in life by having him featured in my book was quite the honor.
That is an honor. And they have saved many American lives, haven't they?
Yeah, they're just, and again, I'm just fascinated about their relationship. These guys with their dogs, they sleep, they eat, they train with these dogs on a daily basis. I mean, they're literally attached at the hip.
Eventually, you're going to make a movie.
I hope so. I mean, at this point, what's been released in the Hollywood press is that, the Sigma Force, they bought the entire Sigma Force universe, not just the books, but also the short stories. And it's being developed by Amazon MGM Studios, by Leonardo DiCaprio's Appian Way Productions, Ocult Entertainment. So I feel like the series is in good hands. I know the showrunner. I've seen other programs he's done. He's done a great job. So I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing Sigma Force handled well on the small screen.
What are the possibilities that the novel Archangel can really become true?
Well, that's a strange thing about my stories. And we've talked about this before, George, about it seems like a lot of times when I write a book, the year after that, certain things seem to come to light that seem to be like almost like you mentioned before when we talked about this. I explained it as that, well, I talk to scientists, I talk to historians. They're giving me cutting-edge information. I put it in my books. And so when I'm sort of leading ahead of them, so when their research comes out into the general awareness and the general public, whether it's through a research article or through a book, people go, well, how did Jim already know about that? Was he clairvoyant? Was he? And my answer was always, oh no, I was just talking to that scientist, 2 years ago when he told me.
And welcome back, George Noory, back with author James Rollins. James, last hour we were talking about the possibility of your clairvoyancy, where what you write generally comes true not too far later. How do you pick up on that?
When we were talking about this last time, I was you sort of planted a seed in my head about, am I picking up something I'm not aware that I'm picking up? Because, I always attribute it just the fact that I was talking to these scientists early on. But it's just been sort of odd over the past year. We talked about Tides of Fire, my last Sigma book, when I was on your show last year. And since then, it just seems like a lot of the things that I was talking about in the book became eerily accurate, from the fact that the number of volcanic eruptions that are occurring. You mentioned about the earthquake in Los Angeles. That book dealt a lot about the sort of cataclysms that are occurring around the Ring of Fire around the Pacific. And then again, just dealing with even just in Popular Mechanics had a recent article about something I wrote or talked about in that book about these blobs, these pieces of the primordial moon that might be buried underneath the Earth's crust, and how they could possibly be the very seeds of life that were planted that became life on this planet. And I thought some of what I was doing was stretching the story a little bit, extrapolating, seeing where that might lead. But then a year later they're talking about it as though it's fact. So it's a little bit disturbing sometimes on what seems to appear later after one of my books come out.
It's fantastic. And you've even raised the issue of UFOs and UAPs before the government jumped in.
Since then, I mentioned in Tides of Fire, which cover UFOs and UAPs, about the fact that, is the government preparing something for us? Are they readying the world for a reveal that's coming up? And I firmly believe that a lot of this information is coming out right now. Some of the documents that are being produced and shed to light, the videos we're seeing coming out, are basically soft selling, just preparing us for maybe bigger revelations. So, I'm curious where that's going to lead. I've been sort of keeping an eye on that. There was back in the 2024 National Defense Authorization Act, the federal government now requires that we share any reports, both internal and external, on the subjects of UAPs out there. They pulled up that law, just exactly how detailed was it. They said each federal agency needs to review, identify, and organize each anomalous phenomenon, or UAP, in record in its custody for full disclosure to the public and transmission to the National Archives. Now, does that mean that we're going to see the truth revealed? Will they, maybe not? I don't know, but it just seems odd that we're seeing more and more of this coming to, these revelations occurring, and I'm just convinced that they're preparing us for a bigger revelation to come.
If you write about it, it might occur.
Well, I wrote about in Tides of Fire, and it seems like incrementally every year we're stepping further to the revelation that we've had contact in the past with somebody from beyond our beyond our planet.
Do you have insiders who sometimes come to you with information?
I do. I mean, that's one of the things I do sort of enjoy when I speak to scientists. Scientists love to talk about their research. That I think their husbands and wives don't want to hear about it anymore. So when there's an interested party showing interest, they will tell you things that, they probably shouldn't be telling you. And so, not only do I have information from scientists, but I have contacts for people in DARPA. I have different sources within the government itself. And oftentimes they're telling me, even my feeling about things about to be revealed have been sort of hinted to me that there are some things that they're keeping under wraps right now. They're afraid that if they reveal it too quickly or too suddenly, it's going to be too much of a shock.
Let's go to the
phone.
phone.
Basically, just seed this out in a manner that's not going to totally cause a total panic.
Mike in Denver, get us started, Michael.
George, so great to be with you. How are you?
Oh, good. Thank you.
Good. And James, wow, this is such an honor to speak with you. First of all, I have to tell you, you are a great author who writes interesting books, so thank you so much. And I just had kind of a quick question. So, James, I know for the first part of your career, you did a fantasy book and a thriller every year, and obviously you kind of got more into the thriller type of books. But what I wanted to ask you is, what do you enjoy writing more as far as the types of books, fantasy or thriller, and what would you say the main differences are when it comes to kind of composing these genres?
Well, when I was, as George mentioned, when I was growing up, I read a lot of fantastical fiction, I should call it. Jules Verne, H.G. Wells, the Doc Savage pulp novels from the 30s and 40s. And so when I began writing, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to write. I knew I wanted to sort of blend everything I loved to read. So, I love to read a lot of, science fiction, fantasy, and horror, and see a lot of that. But I also love really military fiction, so you'll see that in my books. But I also was a very avid fantasy reader, and when I sort of had my breakthrough, my breakout moment of getting my first book sold, I ended up selling two books, one fantasy series to one publishing house and the thrillers to another publishing house. And so for once a year, I was doing one of each genre every year. And as with regard to what is easier to write, I always sort of jokingly say it's whatever I'm not writing seems to be the harder, the easier thing to write. So if I'm working on a thriller, I think the fantasy is easier. If I'm writing a fantasy, I think the thrillers are easier. So each have their own pluses and minuses, and so what I liked was flipping between the two. When I got tired of writing the staccato-paced thriller, it was nice to go into this fantastical world that I could create, and when I was tired of that world, it was fun to go back to that thriller again.
And you do a great job doing it, James. Next up, let's go to Mayat in New York. Hello, Mayat.
Yes, good morning, gentlemen. Always a fascinating morning. I want to first, for the professional and timely way, Tommy, the way he handles callers, I want to salute him and say he is such a gem. You're very lucky, George. And I usually, James, like to ask my point of clarification and question on the phone and then listen to your responses over the radio. George always helps me out with that. First of all, I'd like to know, just to give a little background, several years ago, I saw a certain drift of the U.S., and I read Yale professor Jason Stanley's How Fascism Works, and I understand he has a similar title more recently along those lines. But I wound up looking up at some point, don't remember all the details, this Alexander that you referenced. And were you aware that he self-describes himself as a fascist? And where does that play in terms of your current novel? I looking forward to reading your works. It truly sounds fascinating, and the best to you in terms of your film projects. You certainly seem to have some great talent around them. But the main question is, for those of us who are writers, and I've dealt more with nonfiction, but I know there's at least one novel in me, so I want to know more details of your writing process. How do you outline your plot and any other aspects of it that you can share with all the writers out there? Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. That's very sweet. In regard to Alexander Dugin, he basically is considered to be an ultranationalist, very much a fascist. He basically does believe that that Russia has an ultranationalistic goal to spread around the world, to expand their domain. So he's definitely in that field. In regards to my own process, and I love hearing from somebody that has that novel in them, because that's how I started writing. I just thought I had this book in me, and it just sort of was there gestating for a long period of time. But I had my veterinary career. I had my profession. It seemed strange to even dabble into this other field. But I just couldn't let that story go, similar to what you were just describing. It's hard to let that story go once you have it in your head. And what I would recommend is, I'm not a big outliner. My stories do need a bit of structure, so I know the beginning, I know the end, I know a few sort of the tent poles that are going to hold up that story. But when I begin a story, I don't know how A connects to B connects to C. My joy of writing is that discovery between those tent poles. So don't think that if you've got a novel, this idea in your head, that you have to have every tick and every I dotted and T crossed. Let the story unfold. And you don't have to think of the whole story. Like I said, I was just doing basically 3 double-spaced pages. That's just a page and a half, fitting it in your life. And you'll find out that just doing that page and a half, whether it's every day, whether it's 2 or 3 days a week, those pages accumulate fast. And if all you need to know is what I'm going to do for the next page and a half of my story, don't be intimidated by the breadth and depth of a full novel.
What's the most you've written in a day?
The most I've written in a day is 38 pages, 38 double-spaced pages.
That's a lot.
That's it. Trust me, it was around the clock. I started in the morning and worked all the way until the sun came up the next day.
Let's go to Aaron in Fountain Valley, California. Welcome to the program. Hi, Aaron.
Hey, George. Hey, James. Good job on all your writing. I am a fan, and I appreciate your contribution.
Thank you very much.
I had a question kind of discreetly as far as the Vatican files go. Have you ever heard anything about the Fatima, Portugal UFO phenomenon?
Of course. I was raised Roman Catholic, so trust me that everything about Fatima is very ingrained into me. And one of my cousins is a priest, and so he actually gave me access, allowed me to get access to the Vatican, where a lot of people aren't allowed to go. I got to go to the necropolis underneath the Vatican. I got access to areas that a lot of people aren't allowed to go into. And in not just this book, but some previous books, there's one of those Vatican spies I mentioned earlier. And I love exposing, I like taking people behind that door that says, employees only, or do not enter. Because I got to get access to those areas. I like to share that with my readers, so it was fun being able to expose what many people don't know about the Vatican, about the secret rooms, secret areas, what goes on in there, some of the secret little processes they have on there, all about whether you even talk about the secret Vatican archives, where supposedly there's other secrets being kept. I got access to a lot of that, so I love sharing that with my readers.
When the Vatican talked about the sun that had come down in Fatima, I think it was a UFO.
I would not doubt that at all. And at this point, we can look at a lot of ancient art. We've all seen sometimes with like Chariot of the Gods, where you see evidence of early signs of extraterrestrial crafts, painted into pictures.
Yeah.
Looking back further, there's go back even to not prehistoric time, but into like the ancient rock carvings. Even there, you see evidence of some type of contact with things that do not look of this earth.
That they witnessed and they duplicated.
Exactly.
Joe in Long Island, New York. Hello, Joseph. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi, James. With the Vatican, what do you think they know that they're not telling, or what are they hiding in those books? What would you speculate, and how did this accumulate, and how did they, or how maybe are they leveraging these secrets globally?
Well, we have two types of secrets in the Vatican. There's the ancient secrets. We have ancient texts in the secret archives of the Vatican. A lot of them they're restricted from being read by anybody unless you're a part of the Vatican itself. You're forbidden to even see the copies of these books. So the question is, what are they not allowing us to see? And then there's also the modern secrets. Like I mentioned, they have a vast intelligence agency, and they collect a lot of information around the world that they keep under wraps. Basically, they're keeping a lot of things fairly guarded.
James, what are you working on next?
Well, that's coming up. I've been working, as the previous caller mentioned, I've been returning to my writing a fantasy year and a thriller. So I have the third book in a fantasy book series coming out next February. I'm finishing my next thriller, which happens to be a standalone adventure. So I'm just about putting the last few pages on that together, and then I'm going to be returning, of course, to Sigma again.
Generally, how long does it take to complete a book?
Well, I spend about 3 or 4 months researching the book, and I do that while I'm working on another book. So between the time I start researching the book, that takes me about 3 or 4 months. To write the first draft takes me about 6 months. So all in, it takes about 9 months from start to finish. But there's some overlap because I'm doing research while I'm finishing up another novel. So that's how I managed to get roughly 2 novels done a year.
You're in bookstores. You're on Amazon.
Everywhere a book is sold, you can find a copy. You can find an e-book. You can find audio versions of it. I have great audio readers of my books, so find me anywhere.
Let's go to Jim in Delaware. Welcome to the program. Hi, Jim.
Hey, George. James, you wrote 44 books. Listen, remember in the 90s, they discovered, quote, unquote, the prophecies of lords in the Vatican. Yep. Was there ever a follow-up that I read them? I printed them out of the computer. And I said, they're fascinating. A lot of it's after the year 2000. Anyway, did they ever they never came on the news and said, well, it turns out they're fake guys. People wrote them up and purposely put them in the Vatican to be found. What happened there?
Yeah, so there always was the secrets that were revealed. They revealed 2 secrets, and there was a third secret that was never revealed. And there's rumors that there's actually a 4th secret. So they actually came out and sort of showed what the third secret was. But at this point, many people believe that there actually is a 4th secret that has not been revealed. And at some point, I'm going to investigate and write a book about that too.
The Pope's holding the secrets back, right?
Exactly.
One was the consecration of Russia. There was another one, and then do you think the third had anything to do with the World War?
The third one, again, is couched in a bit of esoteric language, but it does seem to point to a global apocalypse. So at this point, I'm wondering what the 4th one is talking about. What follows an apocalypse? Does it talk about the second coming? Does it talk about a rapturing? I'm just curious, at this point of doing further investigation to see if I can't figure out what that is.
The series of the special forces in your books, are they in every book or most of them?
Only in my Sigma series. So there's 18 books in that series, and the other books are always different topics. Some of them are standalone thrillers. There's some fantasies I've written. I did a whole trilogy about vampires in the Vatican. So it's fun just dabbling about, what could be real and what could be extrapolated to be potentially real.
We're going to come back in just a moment with James Rawlings and take final phone calls here on Coast to Coast. And like we mentioned, his website is linked up at coasttocoastam.com, and his latest book is called Archangel. We shall be right back. And we're back with James Rawlings, author of Archangel. How secretive do you think the Vatican might be, James?
No, I mean, it's still very much couched in a lot of secrets. Again, it's almost similar to the U.S. government in regards to they will give out little tidbits, but they seem to still sort of pull back and hide a lot of stuff behind what feels like transparency, but really is not. Whether it's the Vatican secrets or whether it's about the revelation of UFOs, I think there's a similar pattern going on where they try to pretend to be a little bit transparent by giving us a little bit of information, yet they retain a vast, warehouse of secrets they're just not allowing us to have access to.
Let's go to final calls. We go to Jacob in California, west of the Rockies. Hey, Jacob, go ahead, sir.
Good evening, George. Good evening, Mr. Rollins.
Hi, Jacob.
I'm just a big fan. My first book I read of yours was Amazonia, and I've just been reading them ever since. And you were just talking earlier that you're getting into fantasy books. I would. Would you consider writing like sci-fi novels? Like, have you ever read Hyperion by Dan Simmons? Like,
I recommend Dan Simmons all the time. I think Dan Simmons is an underrated author. He wins awards, and he also, similar to me, jumps between different genres. He writes science fiction. He wins the Hugo Award. He writes a mystery. He wins the Edgar Award. Amazing writer. Hyperion is just a brilliant novel. Whenever I do book talks, people ask me, what author should I read after I've read all of your books, Jim? And I oftentimes mention Dan Simmons. It's so strange that you should bring that up. It seems like nobody seems to know who Dan Simmons is. I'm shocked that you brought up Hyperion. It's one of my favorite books.
What kind of book, James, will you not write?
At this point, I don't want to do nonfiction. I think that a great way of exploring the world is through fiction. But at this point, I have a nonfiction story I'd like to write at some point about almost like a modern version of James Herriot's All Creatures Great and Small, leaning on my veterinary background, and sort of revealing, what is James Herriot's novels, dealt with the turn of the century, this English rural veterinarian and his trials and tribulations of his profession. And I'd like to sort of do that in a modern setting. Is what is it like to be a veterinarian today?
That would be intriguing, wouldn't it?
Yeah, so at some point I just need to carve out a little bit more time so I can get that done.
Let's go to JC in Arizona. Welcome to the program. Hi, JC.
Good morning, George. It's a pleasure to be part of the program.
Thank you, sir. Thanks for hanging in there so long.
Yep, been listening for 20 years. And Cornelius, hang in there and hang on to your Bible. We're blessed and bold as best we can here in Arizona. Mr. Rollins, my dad was one of the first U.S. Navy SEALs, and when he was stationed on Barbados, there was a top-secret facility there called the T Building. They had run a cable up in the ocean so they could listen to Soviet subs crossing over. And I'd never been in this facility, and my dad came home one time and looked at my Etch-a-Sketch, and I had drawn out pretty much an exact floor plan of that building. He took my Etch-a-Sketch away, and the next day he came out, and I was writing it on a piece of paper. Huh. So, yeah. My question is, right now I'm doing some writings, and I'm faced with the few people that have read what I've written have asked me, how did you know that was going to happen? I mean, up to and including the October 7th attack on Israel. And you had mentioned that, when people ask you kind of, tell them, well, I talked to the scientists and stuff like that. And do you have any direction or ideas as to how I hesitate to say that what I'm writing is prophetic, but do you have any direction, when I put these writings out to a larger editorial staff, and how I can explain what seems to be maybe, I've got inside information?
At this point, I'm really intrigued with your story about being able to sort of pattern what your dad was working on. I wonder, is that a relationship between father and son? Were you keying in on what your dad was dwelling on that, and somehow you picked that up? Was it because whatever was being done around that area, you were sensitive to that? I think there are people that are sensitive both to empathic towards other people, that they can pick up things like that. But I also think there are people that are tuned to the world, that they have a sense of what's going on in the world. There's people that can predict earthquakes. Again, when I was doing my research for Tides of Fire, it's all about earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And I found that there's people that can actually predict these. There's documented cases of these people trying to give warnings prior to that. Are they sensing something out there? So I don't think you should shy away from that. I mean, I don't. Sometimes I have an inkling like, why am I writing it this way? What made me make this story turn in this direction? And then, down the line, we find out that where I turn is where it seems like in real life the world turns that direction.
James, how vivid are your dreams?
They are very vivid. Matter of fact, I'm not sure I get enough proper deep sleep because I seem to dream all the time.
And you seem to remember most of them.
I do. I mean, people seem to have an idea that they forget their dreams. I don't. I don't know why that is, but people go, I had a dream, but I can't quite remember that dream. But no, I can pretty much vividly tell you every detail of a dream I have.
We're with noted author James Rollins. We're talking about his latest work called Archangel, which came out this year. Let's go to Mary in New Jersey. Welcome to the program.
Hello.
Hi, Mary.
If you have anything to say, I'll take it off the air because this little cell phone, I can't hear very well on it. But I had a comment about the Portugal,
Fatima.
I was watching a movie. It was in black and white about Fatima.
Oh yeah.
And
Song of Bernadette.
I heard the whole Bible before age 2, and the angel in chapter 10 of the Book of Revelation. It just reminds me of the story of God said he remembered Noah and everybody on the ark, and he sent a wind, and it says the waters assuaged. Well, I always picture that wind as that angel that's in chapter 10, and with the rainbow on his head, right? And he's wrapped in a cloud. And what he does is he's heating the water up, and he's taking it up into that cloud, and he takes it away. And he's helping to get the water off of the earth. And then later on, I was picturing Christ coming there alongside of him and trying to straighten out the earth. Like you go here, you go there. This river belongs here because the earth is a mess, right? It erupted from underneath and over top. So anyway, I always thought of that angel in the Book of Revelation, chapter 10. It just sounds like the explanation of the one in Portugal. And George Noory always thinks it's UFOs, but I'm thinking maybe it's his feet. This is what it's described. Maybe his feet are showing up like that. Maybe he makes himself large or small. I don't know about that.
What do you think about biblical prophecy, James?
I am a firm believer in biblical prophecy. As I mentioned earlier on, I'm always looking for that seed of truth behind a myth. And I think that there is a depth of revelation within the Bible, and that you could read it, some of it as it being parables, some of it being archetypical of things. But I think basically that the Bible was constructed by people that were written by people that were in tune with that world, that were picking up things that they were trying to, in their own mind, try to describe. And put into writing. And so I think, basically what's in there is much truth hidden behind what might seem like just stories.
They were witnesses to something that was marvelous.
Exactly. And I think also they're keyed in. I think a lot of people are just keyed into what's going on in the world, whether it's to other people or whether it's to the globe itself, to whatever consciousness this planet seems to have, and that was their attempt to explain it.
Let's go to Ruth in Maryland. Welcome to the program. Hey, Ruthie.
Hi, George, and hi, James. Thank you for taking my call. Sure. And I just have a comment and a question. It's funny because Cornelius told me you guys were going to be talking about the Vatican tonight, and I didn't hear anything until the callers start calling in. And just my own personal opinion, I think they're not disclosing things just to protect us. But James, my question for you is: you mentioned Matthew Perry, the explorer Matthew Perry, earlier. Could you please elaborate more on that and talk about that, please? Thank you.
Yeah, Robert Perry. He was again one of the first polar explorers, and he came back with stories of seeing a landmass deep in the Arctic, one that was covered by cliffs, clouded up. And when he came back, there were articles in major newspapers about his discovery. There's maps that you can find in those old newspapers about. He called that land Crocker Land. Was Robert Perry called. Again, if you discover land, you got to name it. So he discovered this lost continent to the north, and he called it Crocker Land. And if you look back in the early 20s, 30s, you can find maps of Crocker Land described by Robert Perry from his travels.
Ruth mentioned Matthew Perry. That was the actor who just passed away.
Yep.
Let's go.
It's Robert Perry is the
explorer,
polar explorer.
Eric in Florida, east of the Rockies. Eric, go ahead.
Hey, good morning, George. Good morning, Mr. Rollins.
Hi.
Long-time listener, George. Love the show.
Thank you.
Listening for a long time. Get a lot of stuff and information you don't hear anywhere else. So thank you for that. I kind of have a theory. I've had this for a while about the whole UFO phenomena, and it's something that I try to reconcile with my faith in Jesus Christ. In the Old Testament, it talks about the Nephilim. Okay, and I think the Nephilim they're described as the sons of God, which means they're heavenly beings. I think what the Nephilim were the angels that follow Lucifer getting kicked out of heaven, out of the heavenly realms. And I don't think all of them stayed in the spiritual realm. My theory is that the Nephilim were the angels, demons, as we refer to them now, that follow Lucifer out of heaven. They came into the physical realm, into the physical universe, but they would have still retained their heavenly knowledge, which means they would have been able to develop technologies vastly superior to anything that we've come up with so far. And I think they may have visited the Earth in the past, and it's possible that their craft might be visiting the Earth now. And maybe the secret that the Vatican is holding on to and the governments are holding on to is the fact that they have contact with these entities. And maybe that has to do with the book of Revelation, where they finally reveal themselves and they're like, hey, we created you. We're God, that kind of thing. And they try to take over. Maybe that has to do with the book of Revelations. So I just wanted to push that theory out there, and I'll take your opinions off the air. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. What are your thoughts, James?
Yeah, I did a lot of research on the Gnostic texts, the early chapters of the Bible that never got included in the fourfold Bible that's used today. And if you read those texts in detail, and there's some great books out there that delve very deeply into the text. If you look at the Nephilim, they almost sound exactly like they're just describing extraterrestrials, foreign visitors to this planet. So I believe, again, a lot of what was related in the Bible is their attempt to explain the unexplainable.
First-time caller Chris is with us in Newport Beach, California. Hey, Chris, go ahead.
Oh, wow. Wow, Mr. Noory, Mr. Rollins, thank you so much. First of all, George, I got introduced to you, and no offense, my last name is Conway, through Tim Conway Jr.
Cool.
So ding dong to you, my friend. I 30 years ago was working on a sailboat, and I got introduced to thinking about anything outside the Bible with the lessons of Don Juan and Carlos Castaneda and all those writings. And it made me expand my mind on thoughts outside of what we're told to think, right?
Great material.
Love it. And it's a UCLA professor doing it. And Mr. Rollins, tonight, I was on hold for a while. So, yeah, along with another caller, there was a lot of profound questions that they had ahead of me that made me, but my initial reasoning for calling in it was to ask you, when it was all coming down to the end there, the Roman Empire and the British Empire got to keep all their holdings, and the Roman Empire kept all their money and became the Vatican. And that's what I heard from somebody smarter than myself. And I'm really don't take me verbatim on that. That's what I heard from somebody else speaking. I'm curious what your thoughts are on that position.
Well, I have about 30 seconds, Jim. Go ahead.
The Vatican initially was a major banking system. So I have no doubt that you're correct, that when there was the dissolution and the falling of Rome, the Vatican consolidated a lot of the wealth behind those high Vatican walls.
We still hear a lot about the Vatican Bank, don't we?
Yep.
James, keep in touch with us. Let us know when your next job here is finished. James Rowland's book,